How will the Ravens rebuild their cornerback room? We talk about that and much more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection of vibe below prices, all the parts of car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. We're back. It is Tuesday, and we have a lot to talk about after a pretty eventful Monday. A lot of small little things happening in the world of the Ravens. So in this first segment, I do want to just talk about those, kind of a news, notes, and quotes segment with everything kind of combined into that. And one of those news pieces has something to do with our second topic of conversation in the second segment, which is just how will the Ravens rebuild this cornerback room? Now, they have some of the stars in there, obviously Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters. But then there's really not a lot behind them. You have Tavon Young, who was cut by the team. Anthony Averett left. Chris Westry, who we'll talk about, also departing. So they have a lot of holes there. They'll need to fill them. We'll talk about how the Ravens should rebuild that cornerback room in the second segment. Then finally, in the third segment, we'll get into more mock drafts from Twitter that I wasn't able to read out on yesterday's show because we got so many. And again, thank you for everybody who has been submitting those mock drafts under the Locked On Ravens quote sheet. I put out my mock draft Sunday, and it's really fun to do all of that. So tons of stuff to get into today. Let's dive into it. Before we do that, though, if you're here with us on YouTube, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We're close to 1,200 subscribers at the point of this recording, and I'm looking to build and grow this community as much as we can. Getting in front of Ravens fans is really great, and we have some exciting stuff coming up in the next couple of days exclusive to this podcast, both in audio and video form. So if you want to see what that is, be sure to subscribe to this channel and stay tuned because I'm really excited for this. And also be sure to follow us in audio form, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're there, any platform, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. So let's dive into that. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at ChaosTracker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. Now, the Ravens had a couple of minor-ish news pieces. The first one we'll talk about is Rashad Bateman's jersey number change. Yeah, last offseason, if you remember, we talked a lot about jersey number changes because the Ravens were going through them. They had Marquise Brown change from 15 to 5, LJ Fort from 58 to 3, had Patrick Queen go from 48 to 6. And this was after the NFL had made the rules surrounding jersey number limitations. They eased back on those. A lot of players did it, and we're still starting to see that now. Well, Rashad Bateman posting a picture on his Instagram and also the Ravens posting it on social media as well of him in a number 7 jersey. Yes, Rashad Bateman will wear number 7, formerly of Ravens players such as Kyle Bowler, Trace McSorley, et cetera, et cetera. There are others as well. And now Bateman will be donning a single-digit number, joining Marquise Brown in the wide receiver room as the only two to don a single-digit number at this moment in Baltimore. And, yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I know there are still some of the people who would like to see the just regular positions have the standard jersey number run through. So receivers can only wear, 10 through 19 and then 80 through 89 or something. Like, there are people who, I personally don't mind it. Like, if the players want to wear the number, let them wear the number. It's fine. I understand it. But to me, this is a nice change for Bateman, going from 12 to 7 and seeing now 2 single-digit receivers on the field for Lamar Jackson. That'll be fun. And Lamar Jackson in his single number 8 as well, although he has said that would change to number 1 if he were to win the Super Bowl. And right now, there is not a number 1 on the Ravens, so maybe they're keeping it a bit open for Lamar Jackson to wear that when and if the time comes where he ends up winning a Super Bowl. And I'm very confident he can do that. So Rashad Bateman switching jersey numbers, a small minor note there. Fashion updates here for the Baltimore Ravens. But also there was a report that came out, Ian Rappaport of NFL Network, kind of shedding light on the fact that the Ravens actually offered more money to Bobby Wagner in the first 2 years of their offer than the Rams did. Now, Wagner ends up signing with the Rams anyway, and What Rappaport said ultimately was that the Ravens offered Bobby Wagner, paying him $18 million over two, which is more than the Rams, which was $17.5 million over 2 years. But the LA Rams ended up offering higher incentives. And also, he wanted to stay home in Los Angeles anyway. And then Rappaport says the Ravens did impress him, though. So that's where Wagner chose the Rams. And it always kind of seemed like the Ravens were like the close seconds in this race. I had confidence they would be able to pull the deal off. But as things started to move along a little bit, you kept hearing how Bobby Wagner wanted to play at home, wanted to stay home, probably liked the opportunity of Seattle. So I thought, you know what? The Ravens, they have done this before. They might not have been favorites in the past for free agents, and they have convinced them to come. They have the strong culture, the veterans. They talk so glowingly about the organization. Like it just didn't work out. And for the Ravens, for everybody, it's unfortunately time to move on from Bobby Wagner. It's not happening anymore. I wish it did. I wish it could have. But the Ravens now have bigger fish to fry in terms of how they're going to fill out the remaining parts of their roster that need to be filled out. So we'll be talking about that a lot, and not necessarily so much about Bobby Wagner anymore, but just interesting tidbits about how this stuff all comes together, what goes into a decision from a player, what teams offer. And sometimes the highest money offer is not the offer that ends up getting accepted by the player. All these players have different values, different things of what they want to play for, whether it's money, whether it's team, whether it's staying close to home. And for Wagner, he did want to stay close to home and ultimately chose the Rams because of that and also other factors as well. And also, Chris Westry, cornerback, formerly now of the Baltimore Ravens. Yes, formerly, as he ends up going to the Carolina Panthers, joining Bradley Bozeman, a little Ravens reunion in Carolina. And it's kind of surprising. I kind of expected Westry back, even though the Ravens did non-tender him and they kind of let him do his thing in free agency. I did kind of expect him to come back. It seemed like the Ravens really, really liked him. He's a very unique type of player, a unique athlete, 6'4", with blazing speed. And that's a player that, you kind of want to look at and develop a little bit. The Ravens, I think, tried to do that a bit in season. But then with the corner injuries, the Ravens had to thrust Westry and Anthony Averett and all these guys like 2-3 spots up the depth chart. And so instead of easing him in, it was more like, all right, you're going to go out there and play against some of their best receivers in the NFL. And it's like, all right, well, time to go do this. So it happened that way. Westry signs in Carolina. And as we'll talk about in the second segment, it leaves the Ravens pretty thin at cornerback right now. You have 2 stars coming off of season-ending injuries. But again, we'll talk about it a lot more in the second segment. The Ravens also working out a quarterback per the personnel notice on Monday, a veteran in Josh Dobbs. Dobbs has spent most of his career with the Steelers, has had a stint in Jacksonville. He's been around for a little bit. And this would just be purely insurance, maybe somebody to compete, a veteran for that third quarterback job, which right now I think is pretty open. Josh Johnson signs with the Broncos. The Ravens might invest in a quarterback late in the draft. I wouldn't expect anything earlier than the 5th round at the very, very earliest. And even 5th round, I might think maybe 6th, 7th round undrafted is where they're going to look, just because they have confidence in Lamar Jackson. They have confidence in Tyler Huntley. You can bring in a third veteran or a young guy to compete against each other for that third quarterback position that might not even be a position on the roster. It might be a practice squad spot. So we don't really know how the third quarterback position is going to translate to the roster. Some years the Ravens have kept 3 quarterbacks. We saw that with Robert Griffin III, and when Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson were there, they had that 3 quarterback team, and then they had guys be 3 quarterbacks even a couple years after that. But then in 2021, they only had 2, and Lamar Jackson and Tyler Huntley. Trace McSorley got on the practice squad. So it remains to be seen what the Ravens do there. I wouldn't mind the Dobbs signing if they end up doing it, just because it is veteran insurance. You're signing them to a veteran minimum deal. It's not like you're going to have to break the bank for them. It's not like the Ravens need a quarterback right now. They don't need a starter. They don't even need a backup. They need a third quarterback who, in the event of injuries or something else that goes on, a guy can step in, play high quality snaps, fits the offensive scheme. I think Dobbs would be a decent fit for what the Ravens are trying to do there. I kind of had wished it would have been Josh Johnson, but at the end of the day, Ravens are going to have to go in a different direction there, and they've had to pivot for a lot of the offseason. And I don't know if Josh Johnson was like, there's number one priority type player. I doubt he was, but for Baltimore now, they have another option, at least who they brought in for a workout, and they can kind of see how it goes from there and figure out if he's the best option for them at that position. We'll head into our first break here, though. When we get back, we'll be diving into the Ravens cornerback situation, how they're going to rebuild that cornerback room, what my thoughts on that are. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline. And so now March Madness is over. Kansas beating North Carolina in the finals for the national championship trophy. I was out of this thing for a while. I had Gonzaga and Illinois, and we can finally stop talking about my failures in the March Madness tournament. We can get back to talking NBA, where the Nuggets, they are fighting for a playoff spot. Nikola Jokic looking as strong as ever for MVP. And if you want to bet on those MVP odds or Nuggets games or any other NBA, NHL, or other sporting events, be sure to do that at BetOnline. As BetOnline has everything you need from live Vegas casino games. They have everything you need there. So be sure to go to betonline.net. It has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still hanging out with you here. We talked a bit about Ravens news, notes, and quotes, some general notes from the day that happened. But now we are going to be diving in to the Ravens cornerback situation. As we kind of talked about in that first segment, Chris Westry signing with the Carolina Panthers. We've had Anthony Averett leave for the Las Vegas Raiders. We've seen Tavon Young get cut by this team. Jimmy Smith's out there in free agency. That's pretty much your corner depth outside of Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters. Those are stars, right? You have Marlon Humphrey, you have Marcus Peters. Those guys are stars. They're coming off of season-ending injuries, though. Marcus Peters tearing his ACL right before the season. He missed the entire year. Marlon Humphrey with that torn pec muscle. He missed pretty much the last third of the year. So those guys are going to be able to hopefully come back and make an impact, but you need guys behind them. And the Ravens have invested a lot of money in their secondary over the years. And we saw that this offseason. They signed Marcus Williams to a huge deal, 5 years, $70 million, hint, hint, by the way. But I think that for the Ravens and what they have on this team right now, they need to add to it, and they need to add a lot to it. And there are multiple ways they can approach rebuilding the room. You can kind of set aside the top two cornerback spots for now and say those are going to Humphrey and Peters. If you want to go at this from a depth perspective, like let's just get them solid depth and have the same level players as like a Tavon Young, Anthony Averett, Jimmy Smith, etc. You could easily go out there and sign a free agent or two, draft a corner in the second, third round, and kind of have the quality depth that you would have had if you had brought everybody back and just ran it back. But I think the point of this is the Ravens want to improve that depth, and I'd like to see them improve that depth, honestly. And if you're going that way, let's start with free agency and look at the guys. So obviously, Stephon Gilmore is the top corner still available in this free agency class. He's 31 years old and still one of the best corners in the league, but has kind of taken a step back since the heyday of him and the all defensive team stuff in New England that he had, and even the end of his tenure in Buffalo. But he's still very, very good. And I think for the Ravens, if you can have a trio, Stephon Gilmore, Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, with Marcus Williams and Chuck Clark back there, opposing offenses are going to be throwing that football a lot. I'll tell you that. It's going to be very, very tough. I don't want to downplay the player that Gilmore is. I know that might have sounded like it. Gilmore is still very, extremely talented. But do the Ravens have enough money at this point to invest in a player like Gilmore when they still need to find some edge depth? They might maybe need to add another defensive lineman or two here, maybe another offensive lineman, a potential tight end or a running back. We don't really know how the Ravens are going to approach this, but if they say we're just going to go all in on the secondary and we're going to make it one of the best in the league, or the best in the league, I think that Gilmore is an option for them. But to me, I think that maybe you could look at a player if you're not going to go that route. Joe Hayden, he still is good. Definitely not the player he once was. Chris Harris, Bryce Callahan, some slot corner options. I honestly like one of those two in the slot and then bringing in kind of more of a star outside corner. And whether that is a Gilmore or the draft, you can look at it that way. But I do want to make it clear that acquiring a star doesn't have to be just free agency or just a trade. There are stars in this draft class that the Ravens will have, I think, the ability to pick from a couple of them at number 14. Now, depending on who's there or not, you can look and say, oh, well, is Sauce Gardner going to be there? Is Derek Staley going to be there? We don't really know. I honestly expect both those guys to be gone by then, but I am hoping one of them falls, because I'd run up to the the draft table. I'd run that card in. If that is what one of them falls, I'd do that for sure. But I think for me, Trent McDuffie is a trade down piece who could still be good, but I'm probably not spending number 14 on McDuffie. I'm probably trading down and taking him in the 20s. Andrew Booth, same thing for me. But if the Ravens see Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley fall to like 10 or 11, maybe 12. You're kind of pushing it a little bit. I would maybe make that move up, assuming guys like Jermaine Johnson and Charles Cross and Trayvon Walker and Kayvon Thibodeau, they're all gone. If one of those two guys is really your only remaining options there, at least everybody has a different board. The Ravens have a different board than I do, but if you like those two and they're kind of slipping, or one of them is kind of slipping, the Ravens know corners a need, right? They are not like blind to the fact that corners a need. They understand they have to improve that depth. I'd be completely fine if you want to sign a veteran slot corner like Chris Harris or Bryce Callahan, and then get after a Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley. You add that type of talent to that room. All of a sudden, instead of working with Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, Kevon Seymour, Robert Jackson, you're working with Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Chris Harris / Bryce Callahan, Sauce Gardner / Derek Stingley. I like the sound of that. I really do like the sound of that. And plus, what's it going to take to acquire a star cornerback? I don't think cornerbacks in this day and age are going for as much trade capital wise as maybe they were a couple years ago. It still would cost a lot. Like, don't get me wrong, but I feel like you could get a solid cornerback for a solid price if you're the Ravens. It would just be a matter of the contract. Like Xavier Howard at this point is probably pretty unrealistic based off the new money that he just got from Miami. But there are like a few guys that they could do. But I think the Ravens should be focusing in acquiring a vet slot corner and then looking at Ardarius Washington as another option there. I know it feels like the Ravens like Washington more as a slot corner than a pure safety, which is completely fine. I think his skill set translates down there definitely. But to have the veteran insurance and maybe ease Washington into that role, which I think he could be phenomenal. I am one of the biggest Ardarius Washington fans out there. I loved him coming out of the draft, had him as a third-round pick. He ends up going undrafted, signing with the Ravens. Doesn't really play a ton. He has a foot injury towards the end of the season. But there are those guys where, like, I'm not necessarily classifying them as cornerbacks right now. I classify Ardarius Washington more as a safety. I still classify Brandon Williams as a safety. But both of those guys could be options in the slot if you wanted to use them there. And I think Ardarius Washington would be great. Brandon Stevens is going to have to, I think, play in multiple different roles this season, because although the Ravens will want to kind of get back in every single depth spot on the cornerback depth chart has this like great player, who knows if they're going to be able to do that. I think that for Stevens, with the addition of Marcus Williams, he's not going to be the starting free safety. I think that for Stevens, people were kind of thinking about, well, if the Ravens don't bring in that ball hawking safety, then Stevens can get back there. But now you can use Stevens as a chess piece all around the field. I think part of that will include safety. Part of that will include dime linebacker. Part of that could include cornerback. But you still need other options. You do. And it's not just the stars in the class that also make a lot of sense for the Ravens. Mid-round options. I think the Ravens are 100% going to take two corners. I would be very, very shocked if they didn't. This is a deep cornerback class. Just because the Ravens haven't made the additions now doesn't mean they're not going to have a full room later. They're going to have to. They're going to have to play football in September. They're going to have to make those additions. It's been slow, though, right? It's been slow ever since the Ravens ended up signing Williams and Morgan Moses and Michael Pierce. It hasn't really been much activity from Baltimore. They've been in on Bobby Wagner. They've had a couple other rumors surrounding them. But I think people are just starting to get a little antsy, because it's kind of what we've talked about throughout the past couple of weeks, where the AFC is making moves. The Ravens have made moves, but I think it is being overshadowed by all the big trades and the big signings and the flashy this and the flashy that, when in reality, the Ravens have a plan. I know sometimes you can't really see what they're trying to do. Like, what is the plan? We don't know what the plan is. Can they do something? I think that's some of the mindset sometimes surrounding some of the fan base, which is understandable, right? People want to see moves be made, but at the same time, you have to be smart about it. And for the Ravens, they have historically had this thing where they will be active for the first couple days, and they'll kind of go in a bit of hibernation mode, wait for the market to play out, see which guys are struggling to find deals, offer them below market value, and see if they want to come to an organization that has been lauded as one of the best in the NFL, and all different things that they can do. They can offer them a role there. So it's interesting that it's kind of been the bigger spending aspect of stuff from the Ravens in terms of signing Marcus Williams to the huge deal. But now with the cornerback room, they've lost, well, if Jimmy Smith ends up retiring or leaving or whatnot, they've lost 4 of their quality depth pieces, and Averett, Young, Smith, if he leaves, and with Chris Westry. So I think for me, signing a veteran is very important. I don't think the Ravens are going to go into this season with like 3 or 4 rookies or undrafted guys. I think that'd be a little bit shocking. I'd expect at least one more veteran on this roster. If you want, just I'll read down a couple other names who could be fits. Kyle Fuller out of Denver could be an option. Maybe Janoris Jenkins from Tennessee, of Xavier Rhodes from Indianapolis, and a couple other guys here that could be options. Steven Nelson potentially. I mean, there are options, but I think for now you either want to get one of the top-ish guys like a Gilmore, Hayden, Fuller, Harris, Callahan, maybe even Jason Verrett from San Francisco. Although injury history for me with him is a little suspect. AJ Bouye as well could be an option. So they have free agents available, and if they can add one corner before the draft, I think it would make the need a little bit less of a desperation type thing. And what I mean by that is if the Ravens have a choice between corner and edge or corner and offensive tackle or something, I don't want them reaching for a guy because they feel desperate. And I don't feel like they will. This has never really been the Ravens thing that they do. They've been really good about not reaching for need and instead taking best player or best player in a need, for example. But if the Ravens only are confident in, let's say, Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters, they don't have any other corners on the roster. If there's a mid-second round guy and the Ravens, let's say they trade back to the late first and there's either this really talented edge guy that falls or a mid-second round corner that they're like, oh, we don't really know if he's going to be there, let's take him. I don't want them reaching for that. I want them taking the best player that they can get there at still a need. So maybe you would push the cornerback need a bit because you would have a veteran like a Joe Hayden, like a Stephon Gilmore, Chris Harris, et cetera, so you wouldn't have to say for the Ravens, well, we just don't have any corners. We need to take a corner. And again, they're not really that desperate team that does that. They're very good about just sticking with what they know and figuring out, who's going to help our team now and in the future at a position that maybe is not the biggest need at the moment. Running back with J.K. Dobbins, corner with Marlon Humphrey, those two picks. A lot of people question, why are the Ravens taking a player they don't need right now? Well, you look back on that now, and what do you have? You have an all-pro corner, someone in J.K. Dobbins who could be a Pro Bowl running back in his third year coming off that injury, which I hope he bounces back well. I have confidence he will. But for now, the Ravens, I think, should add a veteran before the draft, draft two corners in the draft, whether that is in the first round or two mid-round guys, because the secondary is super important, especially in a league now that has been going the way of throwing for more and more years now. Baltimore should invest in the cornerback position. They need the depth. They've lost a ton of it. And I think for now, there are multiple different plans, but mine is that signing the veteran, drafting the multiple corners, maybe getting a guy on undrafted free agency, and roll with your stars as well with Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters. I have a pretty high confidence level. Those guys will be able to come back and perform pretty well. We'll head into our final break here, though. When we get back, we'll be diving into your mock drafts from Twitter. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But first, let me tell you a bit about Rock Auto. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it can be impossible to stock all the parts you need. And sometimes when you walk into a store, there's going to be the person behind the counter that orders the parts on their computer, and you don't really know because sometimes it can get a bit confusing. But Rock Auto really, really helps you in terms of everything you need, whether you're repairing your car, buying parts for it. They have you covered. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices, they are super, super low, and they have everything you need for you to get your car to where you need it so you can get to where you need to go. So be sure to tell Rock Auto that Locked On sent you. Rock Auto is the best place where you can go and get car parts, all the parts your car will ever need. Again, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all those parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. We're going to now dive into your mock drafts from Twitter. We got into a lot of them yesterday. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can again here today. I'll just go in the order that I see them in. And first, we're going to dive into a mock draft from Ofi DeFoy, who says, we give Calais Campbell a new contract, then trade pick 14 to Packers for 22 and 53, 22 and 28, or 22 and 128 for Packers, 28 and 59, 28 Devontae Wyatt, defensive tackle, Georgia, 45 Arnold Ebiketie, edge from Penn State, 53 Christian Watson, wide receiver, North Dakota State, 59 Dennis Falele, offensive tackle, Minnesota, 76 Lil Chanel, linebacker, Wisconsin, 100 Jalen Amore Davis, corner from Alabama, 110 Cole Strange, center from Chattanooga, offensive lineman, 119 Damari Mathis, corner from Pittsburgh, 139 Chikakonkwo, tight end from Maryland, 141 Sincere McCormick, running back UTSA, and 196 Matt Araiza, punter from San Diego State. These trades are actually, I like these trades. You're getting value, only moving back 8 spots, with the Packers picking up an extra second-round pick in the process, then moving back again, you package 22 and 128. You get, again, moving back, or 22 and 128, getting back 28 from the Packers, again, just 6 spots back, and you get another second-round pick. So then the Ravens have 3 seconds, They are picking a solid player here in Devontae Wyatt, who I think could go in the mid first. So if you're getting him here, I like that. Ebiketie is someone who I've talked about before. I like him. Christian Watson, another big body receiver who I think, again, that's a skill set the Ravens need. But Lily, a tackle who is a project, but also I think could step in if you needed him to a huge human being. Then you have Chanel, who I think is honestly one of the better linebackers in this class outside of like the Devin Lloyds and the Kobe Deans, etc. And it's just depth. You get the center in Cole Strange, the tight end in Okonkwo, running back in McCormick. You get a punter here, so this would probably spell the end of Sam Cook in Baltimore. But I still think with everything, all the trades, you get value, you pick positions of need here, and plus the players are all pretty phenomenal. So I really like this mock draft here from Offie de Feuille. Next, we're going to talk about a mock draft from B. Ward, who has the Ravens trading pick number 14 and 196 of the Jaguars, and then receiving 33, 65, 70, and a round 2 in 2023. 33, Zion Johnson, Boston College offensive lineman, is the pick. 45, Jalen Petrie, defensive back from Baylor's the selection. Wide receiver Alec Pierce is the pick at 65. Perrion Winfrey, defensive lineman, is the pick at 70. Josh Pascal, Kentucky edge at 76. Rasheed Walker, Penn State tackle at 100. D'Angelo Malone, Western Kentucky edge at 110. Kellen Diesch, Arizona State tackle at 119. Zaquandre White, South Carolina running back at 139. Chika Okonkwo, tight end from Maryland at 141. And Matt Araiza, punter at 222. And the Ravens, they actually trade 128 to Jacksonville, and they receive the 7th round pick and a 4th in 2023. So the Okonkwo-Araiza duo there at the back end has been in our first 2 mock drafts. I don't hate the idea of trading back. Zion Johnson is a very talented player. I don't know if he would make it past Cincinnati at 31 if he does make it that far, but hey, if the mock draft simulator gives it to you, take it. Johnson and Petrie, both very versatile players too, so the versatile draft here from B. Ward. Alec Pierce is another receiver who the Ravens could potentially use. Winfrey, I'm surprised you got him at 70 here. This is actually a really good value for him. I love Rasheed Walker. We talked about D'Angelo Malone yesterday. Kellen Diesch. I don't know if I'm taking 2 tackles. Maybe instead of Diesch, I'd take like an extra corner. There's only 1 corner in this draft. So Petrie is a defensive back, so he lines up all over the place. So maybe I'd just take a corner instead of Diesch. But overall, I think this is a very, very good mock draft from B. Ward. And next, we'll take a look at a mock draft from 406 Raven, who says, let's ride. Has the Ravens taken Jermaine Johnson, edge at 14. Daniel Flilly, offensive tackle, 45. Ed Ingram, interior offensive lineman, 76. Cam Taylor-Britt, corner at 100. Alec Pierce, wide receiver at 110. Josiah Sanders, edge at 119. Damian Pierce, running back at 128. Matt Hennison, interior defensive lineman, 139. DeMarco Jackson, linebacker, 141. And Charlie Kohler, tight end at 196. Those first 4, the Johnson, Flilly, Ingram, and Taylor-Britt, I love those selections. We've talked about each of those here on this show. I've picked them in a mock draft over the course of these past couple of months. I really like all 4 of those players. Damian Pierce is one of my favorite value picks in this draft for the Ravens. They're probably not getting a Breece Hall, probably not getting like Kenneth Walker or Isaiah Spiller, one of those guys. So I think Pierce, he fits what the Ravens need. He could take on a bigger workload than potentially needed if one of J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards doesn't end up being back for the start of the year. So I love that pick a ton. Alec Pierce, again, another receiver Ravens could use. Then there's just the positional value. Interior defensive line comes at 139. You get the linebacker 141, tight end at 196. I think the Ravens will take 2 corners. So maybe, I don't know who I'd take out here, though. I like all the picks. The Ravens, maybe instead of an interior offensive lineman, although they need one of those, but I think somewhere in this draft, maybe instead of a linebacker and DeMarco Jackson, there's a developmental corner. But I still think that the Ravens really get value here. It's, again, best player available, fills the needs, and can contribute for years to come. So good mock draft here from 406 Raven. And finally, we're going to take a mock draft from Yonda Fan Club. Yeah, sorry, I am a part of the Yonda Fan Club as well. And Yonda Fan Club has the Ravens taking Jermaine Johnson, 14, Daniel Flilly, 45, the 1-2 duo again. Then Troy Anderson, linebacker, 76, Zachary Carter, interior defensive lineman, 100, Martin Emerson, corner, 110, Matthew Butler, interior defensive lineman, 119, Damian Pierce, running back, 128, Kobe Bryant, corner, 139, Luke Fortner, interior offensive lineman, 141, and Justin Ross, wide receiver, 196. I love Justin Ross there. I don't think he's going to stay there. I don't think he's going to be there. But I love the Justin Ross selection. I love the Johnson-Flilly duo. Anderson's one of the more versatile. Actually, I might go as far as call him the most versatile player in this draft class. 2 interior defensive linemen. I don't know if there'll be 2. Maybe I would take another edge instead of one of those guys because the Ravens do have Michael Pierce, a couple other young guys waiting in the wings. They'll probably sign an undrafted free agent here or there. So maybe a second edge guy, but Still, I like Kobe Bryant a lot. We talked about him yesterday. Luke Fortner, a solid center option in the later rounds. Martin Emerson, a nice developmental guy in the mid rounds you can get as a corner. So yeah, I like this draft a lot. It kind of lines up with everything the Ravens need. They get the running back. They get some interior offensive line help at center with Luke Fortner there. So yeah, overall, a very good mock draft from Yonda Fan Club. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. When we get back in tomorrow, we'll be answering your mailbag questions, and be sure to stay tuned for what we have coming up. It's very special, and I hope that you will stick along for the ride. Subscribe to the channel and everything. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.